633, we're at ketone bodies, triglycerides, glucose. Is that it? That sound right? All right. The liver's playing a huge role in all this. We've already discussed the fact the liver's involved in a lot of different things. There will be protein synthesis for breaking down substances and detoxifying things. Here it's talking about it storing up glucose. And it can take it from the blood and they can store it up, and they call that glycogenesis. Or they can store triglycerides in forms of energy, and they call that lipogenesis. Or they can produce those out in the bloodstream. They call it glycogenolysis. Lysis means break apart, so it's breaking apart glycogen and making glucose out of it. And then the last one says it can produce conversion of non-carbohydrate molecules into glucose, and that's gluconeogenesis. Sure enough, a new beginning, basically, is what that's saying. So the liver's involved in all these things, and we know a majority of our stored glucose is found here, and the rest of it's probably found out in muscle tissue. Production of plasma proteins, it's the liver. The liver, again, is highly involved in this. Albumin is the most abundant plasma protein, 70%, and albumin is produced again by the liver. We know the gallbladder is a storage vat for bile, which is produced by the liver from the breakdown of red blood cells, used red blood cells. Bile is eventually sent to the duodenum, the first portion of the small intestine, to help emulsify or break down fats. So, multi-purpose, recycling things we can't use for this anymore, turn it into something else. So, pretty efficient when it comes to stuff like that. The pancreas, over on 634, we are looking at the exocrine portion of the pancreas. Back in chapter 11, we had the endocrine portion of the pancreas, which we had the islets of Langerhans, had the alpha and beta cells. Here, we have the exocrine portion of the pancreas, which are called acinar cells. These cells literally produce an enzyme for nearly every type of food we eat, and throws in some bicarbonate to help neutralize things as well. So this is a very serious component of our digestive system. They list several. It says pancreatic juice contains bicarbonate. These enzymes, amylase, trypsin, lipase, and most enzymes have the ending ACE. If you've taken medical terminology, you probably have run across that. And that ACE literally means enzyme. The thing with pancreatic enzymes is that they're considered to be zymogens. That's at the bottom of 635 where they talk about it. A zymogen is an inactive enzyme. So when the pancreas produces this enzyme, it is inactive until it reaches the small intestine, the brushboard of the small intestine. For instance, it lists trypsin. Trypsin's not active until it reaches the small intestine, where enterokinase converts it into an active form. So if these enzymes were functional when they leave the pancreas, they would literally digest the pancreatic duct getting there. That's how good they are. So we don't want them activated until they reach food, until they reach something that they can act upon. On 636 is where they tell you the inactive form of trypsin, called trypsinogen, is activated within the small intestine by catalytic action of the brush border enzyme enterokinase. So there's activation processes once they get there. Moving on over to 637, this is where they started discovering several hormones involved in the digestive system. The first hormone they actually come up with was called secretin. And when they announced the discovery of secretin in 1905, they said this is one of many yet to come. Well, I don't know about many because we're up to 4 now since 1905. But it's more than what we had in 1905. So secretin is the first one discovered. It plays a role in the stomach in getting hydrochloric acid secretion, so the stomach has this very low acid to break down proteins. That's where protein digestion begins. The second hormone to be discovered was gastrin. The third hormone was cholecystokinin, and the more recent hormone which was in the 1960s, so somebody's been on vacation for a while, is a gastric inhibitory peptide. That one actually inhibits gastric motility and slows down what it's pushing into the small intestine. And once small intestine digestion kicks up and starts really functioning, this hormone is produced to slow down stomach activity, because we can't take all this at once. Cholecystokinin helps promote bile production and also sends a message to the brain whether you like food or not. So it's used as a neurotransmitter and as a hormone. Gastrin stimulates, it also stimulates gastric acid secretion. Secretin they don't really tell you what it does, do they? Well, from what I remember, and the study on this was done by a couple of guys, if I remember this correctly too, a guy accidentally had shot himself with a musket back in the early 1900s, and it didn't kill him. When he healed with a hole, and you could literally see into his stomach. And so these two doctors took him in and took care of him in their own home as a patient / we're going to take care of you and study you. And they saw secretin at that time make a difference in gastric acid secretion, and it all was related to his attitude. If he was disturbed and upset about something, gastric acid secretion would be increased, and so would be secretin. And of course later they found gastrin, which they named it, which influences gastric acid secretion as well. But he had what's called a fistula, and it's an opening to the outside. They could literally reach in there and pull out stomach food and test it and see what's going on in there. And that was quite the biggest study. We do that on animals all the time now. We surgically implant things. On a cow, there's a rubber, you can stick a rubber tube in beef animals, feed them whatever you want to, and open the rubber tube up, reach in there and get you a handful, take it to the lab, close the tube down, and he goes on about his grazing or what, cow, sheep, steer, whatever they got it done to, and we can test it. But this was really an odd situation, and boy, did they take advantage of it. And they said the guy was a little cranky. Can you imagine? Every time he'd eat something, say, hey, let me reach in there and get some of that. Leave my food alone, I just now got it down the hatch. But they mentioned Bayliss and Starling here. Bayliss is the main one that did, he was a physiologist, did most of the studies on that. Let's see. Now there's a list of enzymes in table 636, so it tells you what, and a lot of them self-explain themselves. Carboxypeptidase is still breaking down carbohydrates. Lipase is lipids. Amylase are other carbohydrates. Cholesterol esterase would be breaking down cholesterol. So they typically self-explain themselves in what they actually do. Regulation of gastric function. Well, gastric motility and secretion are pretty much automatic to some extent. It's nothing we have to sit around and think about. It kind of knows what to do when we start thinking about food and throw food down the hatch. They mentioned the parietal cells, which we've already mentioned. Pepsinogen from chief cells stimulates absence. In the absence of neural and hormonal influences by the presence of cooked or partially digested protein in the stomach. Now, what they're really saying, when food enters the stomach really goes to work. And what we really know, because of some of the other studies, is that the stomach's already preparing just because you're thinking about it. And then it really focuses on what it's going to do when it sees what you throw in there. So it's already creating the mucus lining. You're already salivating, so that's getting it fired up. So now we get into 3 phases of this, and I don't dive into these 3 phases in any kind of depth. In fact, I don't even remember even asking them on the test. If I did, you can look them up because it's a take-home test, right? The cephalic phase obviously is in reference to the head, and so it's controlled by the vagus nerve. And being controlled by the vagus nerve, this can evoke gastric secretion, all in the process actually of thought. Typically you'd want food entering this process, and that's usually the first 30 minutes of digestion. First 30 minutes of digestion. We get chief cells secreting pepsinogen, and it's all vagus nerve stimulated. So 30 minutes. Gastric phase, this is part of the distension of the stomach. Gastric's getting in the stomach. As the stomach fills and becomes more full, it should send a message by a hormone called ghrelin, which is actually mentioned back 3 or 4 pages before. And the hormone ghrelin tells you you're full. Now that goes back to why we should eat food slower and not just inhale our food. If you start, eating these 3 meals a day, by the time you get to noon, you're starving to death. So you go inhale a big pile of food, and in essence, all you needed was about half of that or less. But you were so hungry, you inhaled it so fast, when you got finished, oh man, I'm full. Because you fed your stomach faster than ghrelin could tell your mind you're full. And now you're stuffed. You're almost miserable. How many times does that happen? You ever eat partially, eat part of your plate, and then something interrupts you, a phone call or something, and then 15 minutes later come back to finish your food and you're full? Mm-hmm. That explains ghrelin telling your brain, you've had enough. You really don't need any more. And because you want a happy plate, you go ahead and stuff your face with it anyway. Everybody wants a happy plate, right? Well, we have all kinds of happy plates at my house, because when I get finished eating mine, I finish the kids and then the wives. We're all happy then. I have this guilt about, I'm paying for this stinking food, we ain't throwing it away, so since I'm forcing the money, somebody's gonna consume it, it's usually me. Used to, when my older two were little, they'd always order way more. The eyeball's bigger than your stomach, they'd order way more. And I'd see what they'd order, and not fussing at them, saying, oh, you need to order this. I'd let them order it, and I just wouldn't order anything. I'd just eat whatever's left. It was all good. Kept the bills down that way. Until we just stopped ordering altogether and said, go home. Now, my dad used to pull that on. My mom's name's Nancy. And would say, oh, can we stop and get a hamburger? Can we stop and eat somewhere? Oh, I've got a favorite place I'm going to stop. It's a new place called Nancy's Kitchen. Boy, it sounded good. It took us 2 or 3 years to figure out it was Mom's place. Mom's going to go home and feed us bologna sandwich. We're still good, though. We get to the last phase here, the intestinal phase. The intestinal phase regulation refers to the inhibition of gastric activity. So once we're in the intestine, we send messages back to the stomach by way of the hormones we just talked about, telling the stomach, slow down your processing because it's going to take us a while to digest and we don't need it all right now. Small amounts of that stomach chyme is all that's going to be released in the small intestine because, number one, it's going to take us a while to finish it, and number two, we've got to neutralize that acid or it's going to tear our small intestine all to pieces. So there's those 3 phases. On the fitness application over on 640, it mentions your favorite breakfast. It says enterogastrone stimulated by fat and chyme, a breakfast of bacon and eggs takes longer to pass through the stomach and makes one feel fuller for a longer time than does a breakfast of pancakes and syrup. Makes sense, don't it? A lot more proteins and fats. Do what? Not your favorite breakfast? You're not American. You don't like bacon? Zink, you're a bacon and eggs guy, attaboy. See how healthy he is? His stomach begs for that, just so he can break it down. Well, I certainly will eat my share of that for sure. The studies done on this is basically, after you eat this breakfast, which is it used to be the old time breakfast that the grandparents ate because they may not even be home for lunch because he's out in the fields working. So they'd eat the big breakfast at daylight to last them longer. And it would, because it takes longer to digest this. And then they would immediately go to the field and work. Now, if we eat this and go to the office and try to focus, it's difficult because it takes so much energy of the body to break down this type of food product, and it literally makes you sleepy immediately. Now, if you eat donuts and chase it with caffeine, then, or orange juice, a glucose surge, then you'll be more spry earlier. You'll be more alert because of the glucose and the caffeine, but you sure fizzle out of energy in a hurry. So the person that eats the big breakfast, they found those people a little sluggish early, but by the time 9:30 and 10 o'clock's rolling around, they're getting stuff done. The people that eats the, maybe the breakfast bar and orange juice and coffee, or the donut, the typical police breakfast donut and coffee. People that eats that, they're going pretty good from 8 to 9. They start falling off at 9:30, and by 10 they're starving to death and kind of non-functional. So there's pros and cons. I think you literally get more out of better breakfast, and they say breakfast is your most important meal of the day because it starts your metabolism of the day. And a lot of people get up and not eat anything. Who does that? Not eat anything for breakfast. And so you start sluggish because you start by sucking from your liver for that glucose instead of starting your energy metabolism by breaking down a food product and keeping your energy metabolism higher throughout the day. You'd be much better off eating a very small lunch and a small supper and eating a very large breakfast. But we don't do that. Today's society says sleep while you can all you get, and sit on the can. There's a new one for you. But when we get in bed, we like to stay there as long as we can. So alarm goes off, we got 15 minutes to throw myself together to get to where I'm going. That don't happen very often, does it? So breakfast, just didn't have time this morning. That's what it ends up being. Eat a big supper before you go to bed. Hard to sleep. Metabolism's kind of kicked up trying to break down the supper. You got your body a little confused now. You're wanting to go to sleep and shut down, and your stomach says, well, why'd you throw all this in here for if you want me to go to sleep? So some people can't go to sleep unless they do have food on their stomach. And some people, it keeps them up all night. So I guess it's kind of how you train your body to an extent. But there are better ways to train your body than what we tend to do. I doubt our habits are the best ways in most cases. All right, moving on from there. Regulation of pancreatic juice and bile secretion. Well, it's basically chyme in the small. When chyme hits the small intestine, the more fat it has, the more bile is going to be produced. And it's really looking for the fat component. The fat component is the most difficult component to break down. So the higher fat foods we eat, the longer digestion takes. And it's it's a disassembly line. So if it takes longer to break something down, then you're going to stay more full longer. Therefore, theoretically, not consuming an extra amount of food. So is fatty products good or bad for us? If that's all you eat, it's bad for you. If it's some of what you eat, mixing in with vegetables and other things, there's nothing wrong with it. Our problem is we tend to lean that way in the fast food too much all the time. And we don't mix in enough of those green vegetables. You know the difference between broccoli and boogers, don't you? The kids won't eat broccoli. So if you can get kids to eat things like that, it's got a lot better for their digestive system. Anything green they think is poisonous. Your kids like green stuff?
One doesn't, one does.
I've got one right now that eats the far out of fruits and vegetables. If she don't have a fruit and a vegetable on her plate, now she loves raw carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, grapes, watermelon, apples. I mean, any type of fruit, she fusses at her mom, where's my fruit? You know? And so we have to keep it all the time, which is a good thing. But then again, she may not even eat a hamburger. So where's the happy medium? I've got a niece that you could literally have real fried chicken, and she'd rather eat McDonald's nuggets. It's like, you're some sick little chick.
That's my oldest kid.
And I'd say, why won't you eat this? She said, oh, I tried it when I was 2 and I didn't like it. She remembers everything when she did it. Everything was, I tried it when I was 2. So I give her a hard time. She's just now fixing to turn 16 now. We've dealt with this for years. I told her dad many times, I said, if she lived in my household, she'd eat her, she'd starve to death. Y'all spoil her too much. So my kid, I had one of mine tried that once, and he went to bed without eating because all of a sudden he decided he didn't like what Mom cooked. So we just wrapped it up in the dish, put it in the refrigerator, and we heard him mumbling around in there at the end of the night, and he heated it up in the microwave, and it wasn't near as bad as he thought it was, and he pretty much eats what's put in front of him now, so not near as picky. But, it's hard enough putting food on the table, but putting a different kind of food for every kid at the table, nah, there's no need of that.
No, they eat it or they don't.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes they're hungry, sometimes they're not, so they don't eat all of it. There's no need of force them into a happy plate, but they just need to, and kids are better than we are if you pay attention. They'd rather have something in their hand, eating on it all the time, than to sit, they're too busy to sit down at a meal. And if you think about that, that's probably the best way to eat food, is if you have good food with you, if you carry, I've seen students come into class and they'll have carrots and they'll just have things to snack on in class, and they eat a little something throughout the day, and it keeps your digestive system an even keel throughout the day. You seem full, but you really haven't eaten that much. And at the same time, your pancreas is not killing itself, spiking out and going way down, spiking out and going way down. It's much better than these 3 monster meals a day that we tend to try to, but society has got us so programmed into those monster meals. Oh, we gotta eat lunch. Oh, we gotta eat supper. You don't think about it until you look at your watch and decide you're hungry. Sometimes it's just a decision. Needless to say, that's kind of the way we fall into it. Now that we know all this information, we'll absolutely do nothing with it. Let's see, secretion of bile, we've got that taken care of. Tropic effects of gastrointestinal hormones, this CCK says that in the same way the structure of the acinar or exocrine cells of the pancreas is dependent upon trophic effects of CCK. CCK acts upon the pancreas, but it also acts upon the gallbladder, so that's what they're telling us. Perhaps this explains why the pancreas, as well as the GI tract, atrophies during starvation. When people go on diets or when people get really sick and they're not eating anything, their stomach literally will shrink back up. And if you reach a habitual point when the stomach's shrunk, not to overeat and stretch the stomach back out, then your weight theoretically would stay back down because you're not consuming as much. But when you get in this, I'm starving to death and I consume so much that, oh my gosh, now I'm just stuffed because you didn't let ghrelin do its job and tell you you're finished eating, and you continue to do this, you continue to stretch the stomach. You stretch the stomach will hold more. You eat more, you stretch the stomach, it'll hold more. So this is what brought about the thought of gastric bypass surgery. If we go in here and we make the stomach smaller, you can only eat small amounts. In fact, they'll tell people that you have to sip water throughout the day. You cannot gulp water. You have to eat food in small amounts throughout the day. You cannot sit down and eat a big meal. Because they've made the stomach so small, it can only handle small amounts at a time. So not only did they do gastric bypass and make the stomach smaller, they've made them change their habits or they're going to create some serious problems. Does it work for a lot of people? It does for a lot of people. And I've seen people that it worked for several years and they fell right back into their own habits and they've gained their weight back and their stomach now distended again, and here we go again. So there is a theory behind the madness out there sometimes. Sometimes it works and sometimes it's just very expensive.
Mainly very expensive.
It is that, no matter if it works or not. So on 643, here's several enzymes. And this is kind of the chart that we looked at the other day that I had done for you. Here they have salivary amylase in the mouth, and to go to the stomach, you have pepsin, the duodenum, pancreatic amylase. Small intestine, you have chymotrypsin and trypsin and carbioxypeptidase, and other parts of small intestine, pancreatic lipase. Other parts of small intestine, maltase, sucrase, lactase, and aminopeptidase. So this is, it's got your pH listed out there. The stomach, see 1.6 to 2.4, 1.5 to 2.5 is a good range on that. In the mouth, 6.7, it's basically considered neutral. And you see all the way down through there, it's pretty neutral until you get to small intestine. First portion of small intestine, we actually go a little beyond neutral, but it's still considered neutral. And then we create a little more acid as we go, but 5 to 7 is not horrible acid. It would all still be considered a neutral. But the types of food will really determine what exact pH is in there at that time. So that's a pretty good chart to look at as well. All right, anything else we missed over here? Hey, look at the bottom of 644. They have some interesting concepts here about newborn babies. Appear to be capable of absorbing a substantial amount of undigested protein. Hence, they can absorb antibodies from mother's first milk. In adults, however, only the free amino acids enter the portal vein. Foreign food protein, which would be very antigenic, does not normally enter the blood. Interesting exception, botulism. There's your exception. This protein is resistant to digestion and is thus intact when it is absorbed into the blood. It's not a good thing when it's intact and absorbed into the blood. Then you have an infection running throughout your blood. Botulism, some bad stuff. I think we've got that covered. And on 647, the last thing listed here is very low density lipids, and high density lipids. So which one's good?
Very low.
Oh, that's bad. That's ugly. So go right the opposite of that. Which one's good? High density lipids, bad. Low density lipids, ugly. Very low density lipids. So that finishes up chapter 18. And will bring us to start 15 on Monday. I think it's 15, yeah. Oh, 15, you'll bring back a little present for me, right? On Monday, you'll bring back a little present for me. All right, I think we're done with this, Tracy.